I think we'll start now hearing your views following a half an hour of brainstorming. So I'm going to go around table by table, and I'll start with table one, if table one is ready.
I'm the facilitator for table one. The citizens at this table would like to hear from somebody from the Department of Social Protection who could give a definitive answer as to what people are entitled to now in respect of pensions. Then another suggestion was to perhaps hear from somebody either from the National Safeguarding Committee or Age Action Ireland in respect of the protection of old people at the moment. Benefits, perhaps an issue or an area that could be discussed is the benefits of signing an enduring power of attorney, so perhaps a legal professional in that regard. Somebody who could talk of different types of pensions and the safeguards in place to ensure that private pensions won't be lost in the future, perhaps an insurance or pension broker. Then somebody who could talk about the possibilities of phased retirement and the possible advantages of this in respect of life expectancy, or else the possibilities of job sharing for older people. And then somebody who could talk about pre-retirement courses to prepare people for retirement. And then finally, somebody who could explain what regulation, if any, is in place in respect of private carers at the moment.
Then table two.
In relation to question one, the citizens at this table are unanimous in terms of income, pensions, retirements being on the next day. In terms of topics within that, they were looking for more information on the retirement age, flexibility of retirement age, a suggestion in relation to reducing the contribution of the pension to Fair Deal from 80% to 70%. In relation to the pension, how much should it be and should it be available when retired? That was in relation to the difference between the retirement age and a year later getting the pension.
Oh yeah, this 65, 66.
Yep.
Yeah.
And linked with the income and pensions was the income and pensions of carers.
The what?
Income and pensions of carers.
All right. In relation to moving on to question number 2, are there other areas that somebody can and want to make recommendations on? There was a request for further information on care options. There was a query in relation to reducing the age of free travel to 65 years and for that to be extended to all EU countries. There was a suggestion in relation to interim opportunities for elder and retired to share their experiences. And linked with that was the pairing of transition year students with retired in relation to specific skill sets and perhaps to roll it out as part of the GOSHKA programme. As part of the GOSHKA programme.
Oh, yeah.
In relation to other presentations that people would like at this table, citizens, one was better clarity on the understanding of indicative costs in relation to pensions and funding models from an actuarial or an actuarist.
The cost to the state, Joe?
Yeah, the cost to the state, yeah. Another issue that they would be keen to get presentations on is the planning for when people retire. A reference was made to some individuals have access to pre-retirement planning courses and other individuals not having access to same, and could that be developed, and not just the income but also the lifestyle changes that someone could expect to have. And in terms of specific reference, there was a request on information on technology that would be available for the elderly. and support to try and transfer the knowledge as to how the technology could be used. And in relation to advocacy groups, there was a specific request on the Alzheimer's.
In relation to?
Advocacy groups.
Oh, yeah.
A specific request in relation to the Alzheimer's Association. Have I covered? And age action as well.
And what? Oh, age action, sorry. Yeah.
And reference in the previous table, but also mentioned at this table, was abuse of the elderly and the national safeguarding.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And the final comment is in terms of the issue of isolation and the age in rural areas, and a specific presentation by Irish Rural Link, and also the reference was made to the retention of post offices.
Reference was made to?
Retention of post offices.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And the postman, the post person. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you very much. Table 3, please. Table 3, please.
Thank you, Judge. I'm the facilitator for Table 3. And the citizens would just like to begin by addressing the concern that the topic itself is absolutely enormous. Yeah. And there's concern that there might not be enough time to put all the concerns into just another weekend. With regard to question 1, there was broad consensus as to the importance of the issues of income, pensions and retirement, particularly with regard to reviewing the retirement age. And with regard to question 2, there were some mixed views as to the weighting of addressing the issues of income, pensions and retirement, in terms of, while there's a need to address the practicalities, there's also a need to look at the broader philosophical vision of what kind of society we want for ageing persons. And feeding into this, one of the citizens would love to see an architect come in to discuss how schemes and integrated living systems are actually visualised. So,
say that again, an architect to come in?
An architect to come in to talk about integrated living systems as to how they are actually visualised and thought about from the initial stages. So a more visual approach over a data-heavy approach. The citizens would also like to maintain the focus on the knowledge, skills and experience provided by the elderly, and to not lose focus on that, with particular reference to apprenticeship schemes and social interactions between generations. In terms of who they would like to hear from, there was interest in the submissions. So they'd like to hear from the Alliance of Age Sector NGOs, the Retirement Planning Council, and or the Active Retirement Ireland. They'd also like to hear from Pension Policy Research Group. And also one of the citizens would like to hear from people who have gone back to retrain either near retirement age or after retirement age, and to gauge their experiences and any obstacles they faced.
Thank you very much. Table 4?
Table 4. In relation to question 1, there was a consensus at the table that all of the topics should be brought to the next weekend for discussion. And very similarly to the commentary from tables 1, 2 and 3, retirement, the retirement age, for preparation for retirement, you know, compulsory ages versus voluntary, the disparity between the age you retire and the age you get your state pension. All of this they felt needed to be fleshed out in more detail, and would like to hear from somebody in that respect. Questions 2 and 3 kind of come together, and there were 3 particular points that came up at the table. The first was a suggestion that there be an assessment of the viability of ring fencing a percentage, perhaps 2% of USC, for care of the elderly, and that perhaps somebody could come and talk about the practicality or viability of doing something like this. The next question kind of was
ring fencing the USC, 2% of the USC.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The next question probably links back to this, and was this whole subject of trust, and the commentary that was made was that if monetary contributions were to be made and ring-fenced to fund a variety of supports for the care of the elderly, what safeguards could, should, or would be put in place to guarantee that such a fund would not be raided in the event of the next recession, such as has happened in recent years with the National Pension Reserve? Could a suitably qualified person come and talk about how we can trust the system going forward? And the third piece was that over the last number of days we've discussed the care of the elderly and unwellness, but we recognise that there are many very well people of age, of retiring age and older in society. We heard yesterday from two people about their nursing home or their residential care experience, and the view at the table was that it would be nice to hear from a number of people at the other side of that, perhaps from a rural and urban divide, about where they are now at that stage in their lives, where they see the opportunities and challenges going forward, and perhaps where they could tell the citizens in the room what they would like the citizens to consider on their behalf over the course of this deliberation. That's it, thank you.
Thank you very much. Table 5.
Judge, I'm the facilitator at Table 5.
Yeah.
A number of issues that were raised at the table by the citizens have already been covered by tables 1, 2, 3 and 4, so I don't wish to repeat them.
Well, I do, in fact, just so that we see how much consensus
Well,
there is.
the common thing is
just
the
briefly.
Sorry, Judge.
Yeah, just briefly.
Softening of the retirement age, technological education, part-time work, and also adult education.
Yeah. Well, what's the view on the first question? Or have you looked at it from that perspective?
No, we didn't, Judge. I just have comments on 2 and 3. And just on number 3, leadership and implementation, they would like to invite the Minister of State to come and talk to us. And on education number 10, a university had suggested courses available. They would like somebody from that university to attend. And just one of the recommendations from one of the citizens is as follows: policies and procedures in hospitals and nursing homes to change to increase the number of people who die at home above 26%. And just one other request from one of the citizens is a link on the website to key reports and strategies that were mentioned over the weekend. Thank you. Sorry, just we agreed to number 1.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I'm the facilitator for Table 6. In response to question 1, the members of the table agreed that the areas of pensions was highly important, and a member suggested possibly looking at the likes of the compulsory employers pension scheme that's in place in the UK. In relation to part 2 and also to areas of discussion, a member highlighted that they would like to discuss the well-being of older people in general. It was also highlighted by a member that we look at practical funding methods, or they would like to look at practical funding methods. And it was also highlighted to look at reorganising existing structures such as the HSC and the reorganisation of staffing within the HSC. In relation to part 3 of who the citizens would like to hear from, it was stressed by a member of the table that they would like to hear from the Retirement Planning Council of Ireland, and the reason being is because the service that they offer is it's a free service, and it helps older people understand their entitlements, and also helps them with practical things such as paying bills and going through paperwork. The citizens of the table would also like to hear from the Home Carers Group, the Alzheimer's Association of Ireland, Irish Rural Link, the Irish Hospice Foundation, and also the Palliative Care Organisation. It was also highlighted by a member they would like to hear from the group alone.
Alone, yes.
Yeah. Sorry, just a point for clarification. In relation to the Retirement Planning Council of Ireland's service they offer, it's not free. So it's not free at the moment. So possibly discussing having a look at that issue and then making recommendations based on that.
Thank you very much.
Judge, this was a recommendation from our table here. That Homemakers scheme entitles mothers to stay at home to look after their children, and they're entitled to receive a contributory pension. Carers are not entitled to the same. Why not? And another point was, who are the people who are making the decisions, and can we hear from them? For instance, the people who are over the Fair Deal scheme. And the people that the table would like to hear from are the Irish Rural Link, Age Action, Active Retirement, and the Irish Pension Policy Research Group at Trinity College. Okay.
Thank you very much.
The facilitator at table 8. The citizens at this table have a number of issues that we discussed, and in summary, they'd like to hear more about maximising experience and contribution to society of retired persons in areas of leadership, how they can become more involved in the community. They'd like to hear from advocacy groups such as Irish Rural Link, and how elderly people in rural areas can contribute to those communities. They'd also like to hear more proposals about how fitness and health maintenance could contribute and reduce the burden on the state. They would like to hear, or rather an observation, about mandatory information on pensions and rights, and how that should be more important. There should be an emphasis on that people don't know what entitlements they have, and they need to be provided with more information every year, and that should be automatic. They'd also like to see a survey of people who have managed without any help from the state, and learn more about them, how they did it, and their experiences. They have a concern, which they would like to air, about the fact that pensions don't usually kick in until someone has attained the age of 66, when the retirement age is 65, and that there's necessarily a gap there where someone might be forced into relying on a social welfare payment. They would like to hear proposals about implementing a model where younger people would be more incentivized to engage more with older persons. They have a recommendation regarding the extension of time for pedestrian crossings. That issue hadn't, the extension of time for the lights on pedestrian crossings.
Oh, yes.
That issue hadn't occurred to them before, but it seems very small. It should be something that they would just recommend outright. They would like to hear from advocacy groups such as Age Action Ireland, who would have a good idea on other relevant issues and possible solutions. And they do also have some interest in hearing more about assisted dying, and perhaps would like to hear from Irish Hospice Foundation on that. They acknowledge that that's a very large topic, and they don't want it to overshadow other issues which might take place in a single weekend.
Oh, yes, sorry, yes. Did you give specific consideration to what was question 1?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much. Then we're going to table 9.
The citizens of table 9 unanimously agreed with question 1. In relation to number 2, the citizens had a number of recommendations. Firstly, that an information campaign should be rolled out to inform, educate and advise older people on their entitlements. Also, they recommended the illnesses covered by the long-term illness card should be expanded. They also recommended that measures be put in place to ensure maximum waiting times are set in stone rather than spending more money generating reports that don't seem to be acted on. Also, to investigate incentives to keep Irish trained nurses in Ireland. And also the final recommendation was to focus more on healthy older people and not just dementia or long-term illnesses. And regarding part 3, they want to hear from a number of groups: SAGE, the Retirement Council of Ireland, the COPE Foundation, the Alliance of Age Sector NGOs, the Irish Rural Link, Inclusion Ireland, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, SHARE, which is a housing agency based in Cork, and representatives of daycare centres for the elderly.
Thank you very much.
Sorry. Oh, sorry, and the Minister of State for the elderly.
That's Minister McEntee.
Helen McEntee, sorry.
Yes, yes.
Judge, I'm the facilitator for table 10. In terms of question 3, the citizens at this table would like to hear from carers NGOs, some volunteer group in terms of where they have a model that's working or they feel that's working. Also the All Ireland Institute of Hospice and Palliative Care, the Irish Rural Link, All Party Oireachtas Group on Dementia. And then one of the citizens at the table would like to hear from someone from the government, just in terms of explaining. So we have plenty of reports, frameworks and plans, but there's very little in terms of deliverables. Then in terms of question 2, again, similar to what other tables have said, that there be an information booklet just so that families know where to go. Also about living wills, that there should be a national discussion on advanced care planning. And then in terms of question 1, it was a unanimous decision at this table for that.
Thank you very much.
Oh, and sorry, in terms of as well, that to have a solicitor or a legal professional to speak about wills, powers of attorney, tax incentives and wards of court, and then also to mention about elder abuse as well.
Good afternoon. I am the facilitator for Table 11. The members at this table feel that there is not enough time in one weekend to cover all the material that we need to get through. In terms of question 1, the members would like to focus on the legality around retirement rules and compulsory retirement. They would also like to see a section detailing and discussing the state pension. In relation to question 2, the members would like the option to make recommendations on carers and their incentives and entitlements. On question 3, members would like to hear from the following groups: the Irish Pension Policy Research Group, the Retirement Planning Council of Ireland, Age Action, and Core Alliance Ireland. In terms of specific recommendations, the members would like more promotion and education from the state on areas such as the state pension and long-term care.
Good afternoon. I am the facilitator for Table 12. On question 1, the citizens felt that the Pensions Authority would be a very good one to come in to discuss.
Who would?
The Pensions Authority of Ireland.
All right.
To discuss, explain pensions now, future requirements and policies, and maybe discuss opt-in, opt-out ideas. For the second question, the recommendations, they'd like to get more details on home sharing, co-housing, age-hostile public service access, attitude, and when forms and those type of things that people have to fill in, and how they're treated by the people they deal with. They'd also be interested to know about security, legal, judiciary, someone to explain how to protect elderly from theft, abuse, internet, that sort of thing. They would like maybe the idea of a department of aging or a department for older people set up, They'd also like us to make recommendations on technology. And they would like the following people to come in for question 3. Genio, Sage, Age Action, Glór, Age Action Galway, as they seem to be a local people at the coalface, and then an expert on the technologies, assisted technologies.
Thank you very much.
I am the facilitator for Table 13. The citizens would begin just by commenting, as some other tables have, that the topic is very broad and there isn't really enough time to discuss it fully. In relation to question 1, the concept of forced retirement, and also how retirement is sudden instead of a phased process was discussed. The gap between the time of retirement and when the state pension kicks in was also mentioned. The need to encourage, to allow retirees to contribute to society and integrate into society, and integrate into the community post-work. Also, the benchmarking of the state pension, the cost of that or the practicality of that was raised. In relation to question 2, the citizens would like to discuss advocacy for elderly in care, and related to that, the concept of consent in relation to the elderly in care and in general in relation to their choice going forward and their feedback being taken into account. And also the concept of elder abuse, yes, and the abuse of the elderly. Further, the issue of care for the increasing number of people who are childless, whether through emigration or just through life, and who won't have family support as they age. In relation to who the citizens would like to hear from, they'd like to hear from Roisin Shorthall in relation to primary care, and they'd like copies of the future healthcare report. And they'd like to hear from Roisin Shorthall in preference to Helen McEntee. They'd also like to hear from someone from who was involved in the Tilda project, as it was referenced several times throughout the weekend. And they'd like to hear from a person with first-hand experience of the primary care service that was described by Pat Healy, and from people with first-hand experience of living on the state pensions, contributory and non-contributory. And they'd like to hear from someone such as Age Action Ireland, who could cover the idea of ageing in the urban setting and the rural setting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judge. I'm the facilitator for Table 14. The citizens at this table are in agreement with discussing income, pensions and retirement. In relation to income, they felt it would be useful to have employment experts invited to address the Assembly, specifically to address job opportunities for older people, as well as mentoring and succession planning in the context of phased retirement, as raised by Table 1. With regard to pensions, it was felt it would be useful to hear from somebody such as the Irish Pension Policy Research Group of Trinity College, who made a submission. And with regard to retirement, it would be helpful to hear from experts to address, in the context of extended retirement age, its impact on job entry, succession planning, promotional opportunities, and the pension impact if somebody is forced to retire early due to ill health. In the context of information, the citizens of this table felt it would be useful to hear from HICWA. In particular, do they provide information, clarification of their function, and also perhaps to hear some of their good news story rather than the generally publicized bad stories we hear from them in their capacity as the armed wing of the HSE. With regard to advocacy groups, the suggested groups were SAGE, Age Action, and the Citizens Advice Bureau. It was also felt that it would be helpful to hear from somebody in the area of end-of-life care. One such suggestion was Brendan O'Hara of the All-Ireland Institute of Hospice and Palliative Care, who made a submission to the Assembly. And finally, there is a recommendation from Table 14 that a ballot might include the following question: do we believe that funding for home care package should be on a statutory basis? Thank you, Judge.
Thank you very much.
Apologies, Judge. I just left one point out for the second question in terms of points to be considered. Table 10, Judge. I'm the facilitator at Table 10.
Yeah.
For long-term carers, there's one of the citizens at this table thought that maybe an optional formal training or a certification for long-term carers with a view to being able to help other people if they choose to when one of their relatives or if their relative passes away. And then in terms of the USC charge, the table agreed that a portion of it should be allocated to long-term care. Thank you, Judge.
Well, you've been working very hard over the last half hour, and with the assistance of the expert advisory group, we will take your suggestions into consideration in determining what we're going to do on the next at the next meeting, which, as you know, is in the beginning of July. I just want to say a few words to wind up the proceedings this weekend. I think we've had a very successful first meeting. It's the first of two meetings on this topic, the challenges and opportunities of an ageing population and how they are responded to. We've heard how our society is getting older, the options and systems in place to support people as they age regarding long-term care when it is required, and the experiences of both those receiving care and those providing it. Once again, I'd like to thank all the speakers for their contributions this weekend. All the papers and the presentations prepared by our speakers are available on the website. And as I mentioned this morning, and I think it's important, in addition to the papers, the slides will be on the website. And I think you'll probably find the slides of particular assistance when you're reviewing what we've been doing this week. I think you will agree that the situations we heard about this weekend are ones that we can all recognise and relate to. Either we have experienced it ourselves or with our parents, grandparents, friends or neighbours. This is stating the obvious: ageing affects us all. I think it is fair to say that we have a vested interest in making worthwhile recommendations to the houses of the Oireachtas, and I think your contribution in the last half hour bears that out. In anticipation of the second weekend, which is the 8th and 9th of July, we asked you what other aspects of this wide-ranging topic we should consider. And as I said at the outset, the Secretariat and I will reflect on your suggestions over the next few days, and then we will later in the week, hopefully, get the assistance of the EAG on them, and so that we can come to a conclusion as soon as possible, because that's very important. And again, and you hear me say this every time I stand here, we have to remember that the Citizens' Assembly is what it really is an exercise in deliberative democracy, and we must endeavour to base our work programme on the suggestions that you put forward. Now, I've no doubt, just from listening over the last half hour, that it will not be possible in reality to cover every area you've suggested, and that's unfortunate, but we will try and assess what overall you really want to hear about. But we will be very conscious of the importance you attach to all of these suggestions you've made. And of course, you know that we may choose to hear oral presentations from representative groups or individuals to assist in the deliberations. You've given us some suggestions. In fact, you've given us an awful lot of suggestions, and we'll see how best to incorporate them in the next weekend hearing. As always, I've been hugely impressed by your involvement and engagement with the process this weekend. You've shown the same levels of commitment to the process and the same dedication as you did for the work which has gone before. I just want to say, refer briefly to our next topic, which is tackling climate change. We will consider that topic at the meeting at the end of September. And tomorrow, we will open the submissions process for this topic. Advertisements will appear in papers tomorrow, and the Secretariat will be undertaking as much active outreach as possible to engage interested parties. And these submissions can be sent to online to the Citizens' Assembly, or they can be posted to 16 Parnell Square, Dublin 1. And the submissions process will remain open until 5 p.m. on the 11th of August. So I really would strongly encourage those with an interest in climate change to make a submission. It is another vitally important issue facing governments throughout the world. And of course, as you know from the recent past, it's very topical. But anyway, it is a topic that the Oireachtas has asked us to consider and make recommendations on and report on, and we'll do the best we can in doing that. That's the end of this weekend, you'll be glad to hear. All I can say is Slán Abhaile, and I look forward to seeing you in July. Thank you very much.